Snow fell thick as cold ash. Wind screamed through the shattered concrete walls of the besieged outpost. Inside, the Special Operations team had run dry on ammunition. Their radio crackled with static, each man wounded in turn. Outside, dozens of hostile gunmen tightened the noose. In the corner of the darkened room, a woman in logistics fatigue silently wiped blood from her hands. No one paid her attention. They said she was just the aide riding along. Until the first shot rang out through the blizzard, and everything changed. The temperature had dropped to -15 by nightfall. Sarah Mitchell stamped her boots against the frozen ground outside the prefab structure that served as their temporary command post. 23 hours ago, she'd been sitting in a climate-controlled office at Fort Bragg, reviewing supply manifests. Now, she stood in the middle of nowhere, watching her breath crystallize in the air. Liaison officer, right? The voice belonged to Captain Derek Hammond, team leader of Viper Squad. He didn't look at her as he spoke. His attention focused on the terrain map spread across a makeshift table. Logistics coordination and situational analysis, Sarah replied. The official title was longer, but no one ever remembered it anyway. Hammond nodded absently. Stay close to the comm equipment. If we need to relay anything back to base, you'll handle it. Around her, 8 operators moved with practiced efficiency. They checked weapons, adjusted gear, spoke in shorthand that came from years of working together. Sarah recognized the dynamic immediately. She'd seen it dozens of times before. A tight unit, battle-tested, instinctively coordinated. And her, the outsider, the person from headquarters, the one who didn't belong. Sergeant Marcus Reed glanced her way as he loaded magazines. First time forward, ma'am? No. Sarah kept her voice neutral. Just asking because... He paused, diplomatic. It gets rough out here, different from behind a desk. Sarah didn't respond. She'd learned years ago that explaining only made it worse. Let them think what they wanted. It was easier that way. The outpost sat on a ridge, overlooking a valley carved by centuries of wind and ice. The nearest friendly position was 40 kilometers south. The mission brief had been straightforward. Establish observation, gather intelligence on suspected weapons trafficking routes, maintain low profile. Simple, routine, except nothing about the terrain felt routine. How long have we been compromised? Lieutenant Jake Morrison asked, studying the horizon through binoculars. Unknown. Hammond's jaw tightened. Could be hours, could be days. Sarah moved to the western window, careful to stay below the sightline. Through the cracked glass, she counted movement in 3 separate locations. The hostiles were positioning themselves methodically, not a random attack. This was organized. They're setting up crossfire positions, she said quietly. No one acknowledged her observation. Specialist Kevin Torres tapped his radio. Comms are getting interference. Could be atmospheric, could be jamming. Try alternate frequencies, Hammond ordered. Sarah returned to the map, tracing elevation lines with her finger. The valley created a natural bottleneck. Anyone approaching from the south would be exposed for nearly 2 kilometers. The northern route ended in a cliff face. East and west were the only viable exits, and both were now being watched. Someone had done their homework. Ma'am, can you check the inventory logs? Reed asked. I want to know exactly what we're working with. Sarah pulled up the digital manifest on a ruggedized tablet. 600 rounds of 5.56, 200 rounds of 7.62, 4 grenades, 2 smoke canisters, 1 medical kit partially depleted, and enough water for 48 hours if rationed. Fuel for the generator? 8 hours at current consumption. Reed exchanged a glance with Hammond. Neither man said what they were both thinking, but Sarah could read it clearly enough. They were hoping for extraction within 12 hours. Anything beyond that would get complicated. The wind picked up, howling through gaps in the walls. Snow began to accumulate in drifts against the eastern side of the structure. Sarah calculated wind speed, visibility, temperature drop. Every variable mattered now. Movement, 2 o'clock, Morrison announced. Everyone went still. Through the scope mounted on his rifle, Hammond studied the tree line. Confirmation. At least 6 hostiles, possibly more behind cover. Rules of engagement? Torres asked. Hold fire unless fired upon. We don't want to announce our exact position. Sarah watched the hostile force spread out with disturbing precision. They moved like professionals. Not militia. Not untrained insurgents. These were soldiers. Captain, they're boxing us in, she said. Hammond finally looked at her directly. I can see that. They're not planning a frontal assault. They're establishing siege positions. Thank you for the analysis. His tone wasn't hostile, just dismissive. The tone of someone dealing with a distraction. Sarah stepped back. She knew that tone too. She'd heard variations of it her entire career. Stay in your lane, stick to logistics, leave tactics to the professionals. The first shot came at 1,847 hours. It punched through the northern window and embedded in the far wall, sending concrete dust into the air. Everyone dropped immediately, weapons up, scanning for targets. "Suppressing fire! 3 o'clock!" Hammond shouted. The operators responded with controlled bursts. Muzzle flashes lit up the gathering darkness. The hostiles returned fire, rounds impacting against the structure in a steady rhythm. "They're ranging us," Morrison said, adjusting for distance. Another burst of gunfire. This time, glass exploded inward from the southern window. Torres cursed as shrapnel caught his shoulder. "You hit bad?" Reed called out. "Flesh wound. I'm good." But Sarah saw the blood spreading across his sleeve. Not life-threatening, not yet. But blood loss would accumulate. Shock would follow. Every injury compounded. The firefight lasted 3 minutes before the hostiles pulled back. The sudden silence felt heavier than the gunfire. "Status report," Hammond ordered. "Torres is wounded. Minor," Reed reported. "Ammunition expenditure approximately 90 rounds. 90 rounds gone in 3 minutes. Sarah did the math. At that rate, they had maybe 2 more engagements before they'd be down to handguns and harsh language. Hammond moved to the radio. "This is Viper Actual, requesting immediate air support. Over." "Static." "Viper Actual to base command. How copy?" More static, occasionally broken by fragments of something that might have been a human voice but was too distorted to parse. "Jamming is active," Sarah said. "They're using directional equipment. The signal strength varies based on our transmission angle. Can you fix it?" "Not without different equipment." Hammond's expression darkened. He keyed the radio again, trying different frequencies, different call signs. Nothing but electronic noise. They were cut off. Sarah moved to the window, studying the hostile positions in the failing light. She counted muzzle flashes, mentally mapping each location. 17 distinct positions, which meant at least 17 hostiles, likely more in reserve, against 8 operators, one of whom was now wounded, and 1 logistics officer who wasn't supposed to be there at all. The attack resumed 40 minutes later with coordinated precision. Rounds poured in from multiple angles simultaneously. The concrete structure shook with impacts. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Hammond divided his team, positioning operators at each window to return fire. "Conserve ammunition," he shouted over the chaos. "Controlled bursts only." Sarah crouched near the eastern wall, away from the windows. Her official role was clear. Stay out of the way, don't become a liability. She watched the operators work, noting their spacing, their communication, their discipline under fire. But she also watched the pattern of incoming rounds. The hostiles were probing, testing different angles. They were learning the structure's weak points. The attack lasted 6 minutes this time before falling silent again. "Ammunition count," Hammond demanded. "Down to 420 total," Reed reported. "At this rate—" "I know." Hammond cut him off. Everyone knew. Morrison moved from his position, pressing a hand against his side. When he pulled it away, his palm was red. "You're hit," Reed said. "Ricochet caught me through the window frame." Morrison's voice was tight. "It's not deep." Sarah grabbed the medical kit. "Sit down, let me see it." Morrison hesitated, but Hammond nodded. Sarah worked quickly, cleaning the wound. The fragment had gouged a channel along Morrison's ribs, painful, but it had missed anything vital. She packed it with gauze and secured it with tape. "You're lucky," she said. "Don't feel lucky." Outside, darkness had fallen completely. Snow continued to fall, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. Sarah moved to the map, studying it by the light of a battery-powered lantern. "They'll wait until we're exhausted," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "What was that?" Hammond asked. Sarah looked up. All eyes were on her now. She chose her words carefully. "The attack pattern. They're not trying to overrun us. They're bleeding us dry. Ammunition, energy, morale. When we're weak enough, they'll move in." Hammond studied her for a long moment. "You've seen this before?" "I've read the reports." It wasn't quite a lie. She had read the reports. She'd also lived through situations like this, but that was information she'd carefully omitted from her service jacket. "How long do we have?" Torres asked. Sarah calculated. "If they maintain this tempo, we'll be critically low on ammunition by dawn. They know it. They're patient." "So what do we do?" Specialist Ryan Kowalski asked. He was the youngest, barely 23, and Sarah could hear the edge in his voice. We adapt, Hammond said firmly. We're not done yet. But Sarah saw the doubt in his eyes. He was running scenarios, wargaming options. None of them ended well. The temperature dropped further as midnight approached. The generator coughed and died, plunging them into darkness. Reed got it restarted, but the fuel gauge showed less than 2 hours remaining. We shut it down except for emergencies, Hammond decided. Everyone, layer up. It's going to get cold. Cold was an understatement. Within 30 minutes, Sarah could see her breath in the air inside the structure. The wounded men, Torres and Morrison, began shivering despite additional layers. We need to keep them warm, Sarah said. Hypothermia will set in fast. Hammond nodded to Reed. Redistribute thermal blankets, priority to the wounded. Sarah moved through the darkness, checking on each operator. They were professionals, trained for extreme conditions. But training had limits. Biology had limits. At 0230 hours, the hostiles tested them again, this time with grenades lobbed toward the structure. Most fell short, exploding in the snow. One landed close enough that the blast wave rattled the walls and sent everyone diving for cover. When the dust settled, a new problem had emerged. The eastern wall had cracked, a fissure running floor to ceiling. The structure's integrity was compromised. If they hit that wall with another grenade, the whole section could collapse, Reed observed. Hammond positioned 2 operators to cover the weak point, but Sarah could see the arithmetic getting worse, dividing an already outnumbered force, defending an indefensible position, waiting for rescue that couldn't reach them. She moved to the corner where a damaged rifle lay abandoned. The stock was cracked, but the mechanism looked intact. She checked the action, still functional. You know how to use that? Kowalski asked. Sarah glanced at him. I went through basic training. That's not what I asked. She didn't respond. Instead, she found cleaning supplies and began field stripping the weapon, working by touch in the near darkness. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, removing the bolt carrier group, checking for obstructions, reassembling. Reed watched her work. Where'd you say you served before this? I didn't. Uh-huh. He smiled slightly. Logistics coordination, right? That's what my orders say. The third attack came at 0400 hours. This time, the hostiles coordinated with suppressing fire, keeping the operators pinned while other elements maneuvered closer. They're advancing, Morrison shouted. Western approach! Hammond and Torres shifted positions, laying down fire to halt the advance. The muzzle flashes lit up the snow like strobe lights. Sarah moved to the northern window, the repaired rifle in her hands. Through the scope, she could see movement shadows against snow. 3 hostiles using the terrain for cover, working their way forward in bounds. She tracked the lead figure, calculated windage, adjusted for the rifle's damaged stock. Contact north, she called out, and fired. The figure dropped. The other operators paused, momentarily surprised. Then training took over, and they continued engaging their targets. Sarah worked the bolt, acquiring the second hostile. Fired. Missed the damaged stock, threw off her aim. Adjusted. Fired again. The hostile went down. The third retreated rapidly into cover. When the attack broke off, the operators regrouped. Hammond looked at Sarah with new calculation in his eyes. Where exactly did you do basic training? He asked. Sarah checked the rifle's action, ejecting a spent casing. That's not relevant to the mission. The hell it's not. You just dropped 2 hostiles in a blizzard with a broken rifle. They were close range. And the rifle's not broken, just the stock. Hammond moved closer, his voice lower. Who are you? Sarah met his gaze. I'm a logistics officer on temporary assignment. That's all you need to know. Not anymore. It's not. Before Sarah could respond, Reed called out from the eastern window. Captain, we've got a problem. They're setting up something in the tree line. Could be a mortar. Everyone moved to look. Through the darkness and snow, a faint light source was visible, partially obscured by trees. If they have indirect fire capability, this position becomes untenable, Morrison said. Hammond's face was grim. Recommendations? Sarah studied the terrain, the hostile positions, their own dwindling resources. Every option was bad. Some were just less catastrophic than others. We need to break their rhythm, she said quietly. Stop reacting. Start dictating. With what? We're almost out of ammunition, we've got wounded, and we're outnumbered at least 2 to 1. Sarah looked at the map one more time, then at the rifle in her hands, then at the darkness beyond the windows. Give me 30 minutes, she said. I can change the equation. Hammond stared at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. Explain. Their advantage is numbers and firepower, but they're staying back because they don't know our exact capabilities. They're being cautious, professional. So if we eliminate their key assets, spotters, heavy weapon operators, commanders, we can make them cautious enough to slow down. Buy time for rescue. Reed shook his head. That's a sniper mission. We don't have. He stopped, looking at Sarah with sudden understanding. Wait, you're not suggesting. I can't do it from here, Sarah continued, ignoring the interruption. The angles are wrong and they'll spot the muzzle flash immediately, but there's a rock formation about 200 meters north. Better elevation, better concealment. That's outside our defensive perimeter, Hammond said. You'd be isolated. If they spot you, they won't. You can't guarantee that. No, Sarah agreed. I can't. Silence filled the space. Outside, the wind howled. The temperature gauge read -22. Morrison spoke first. Captain, we need something. Sitting here, we're dead by dawn. She's logistics, Kowalski protested. We can't send a rear echelon officer on a solo infiltration. I'm not asking for permission, Sarah said quietly. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can support it or not. Hammond's expression cycled through frustration, calculation, and finally resignation. What do you need? The best rifle we have. All remaining 7.62 ammunition. And your thermal scope. Reed handed over his precision rifle without a word. Hammond unclipped his thermal scope and passed it over. 30 minutes, Hammond said. Then we're extracting you. Finished or not. Sarah checked the rifle's action, loaded a magazine, clipped additional ammunition to her belt. The weight was familiar, comforting, even. One more thing, she said. When I open fire, they're going to focus on my position. Use that window to reposition your heavy fire assets. Move to the eastern side. Use the crack in the wall as an improvised firing port. Torres nodded slowly. Hit them from an unexpected angle while they're focused on you. Exactly. That puts you at serious risk, Reed pointed out. Everything about this situation is serious risk. At least this way, we're choosing how to take it. Sarah moved to the northern exit, barely a door, more a gap in the concrete. Snow had piled against it. She pushed through, feeling the brutal cold wrap around her immediately. Behind her, she heard Kowalski whisper, "Who the hell is she really?" Hammond's response was too quiet to make out. Sarah moved through the darkness, using terrain and snowfall for concealment. Each step was calculated, boots placed carefully to minimize noise, breathing controlled to reduce vapor clouds. She'd done this before, in other places, under other circumstances. Muscle memory took over. The rock formation emerged from the blizzard like a frozen sentinel. Sarah climbed carefully, finding a position with clear sightlines toward the hostile positions. She set up the rifle, adjusting for wind and distance using the thermal scope. Through the scope, the world translated into heat signatures. She identified the mortar position immediately, 3 figures clustered around equipment, one clearly directing the others, a commander or senior gunner. She tracked to other positions, cataloging threats. A sniper team on elevated ground, a heavy machine gun position being reinforced with additional crew, communications equipment being operated by a figure who stood apart from the fighting positions. Priority targets. Remove these, and the hostile force would lose coordination and overwhelming firepower advantage. Sarah chambered around, settled into position. The cold bit through her layers, but she ignored it. Cold was just sensation. Pain was just data. Focus was what mattered. She acquired the mortar commander, adjusted for wind, distance, the rifle's specific characteristics. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Then everything went wrong. A shout from behind her. Close. Too close. Sarah rolled sideways as gunfire erupted, rounds sparking off the rocks where she'd been positioned. She came up firing, dropping one hostile at 15 meters. But there were more a patrol she hadn't detected, possibly alerted by her thermal signature. The firefight was brief and brutal. Sarah moved through the rocks, using cover, firing when targets presented themselves. 2 more hostiles dropped, but her position was completely compromised now. Worse, the gunfire had alerted every hostile in the valley. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions, all converging on her location. Rounds ricocheted off stone, kicking up ice and rock fragments. Sarah pressed herself into cover as the world exploded around her. "Mitchell!" Hammond's voice crackled over the radio clipped to her vest. "What's your status?" "Compromised. Multiple hostiles. I'm pinned. Can you extract?" Sarah looked at the distance back to the outpost. 300 meters of open ground, fully illuminated by now, with at least a dozen hostile positions tracking her location. Negative. Not without cover. We're coming. No. Sarah's voice was sharp. You move out there, we all die. Stay in position. Through the scope, she could see the hostiles organizing. They knew they had her trapped. They were taking their time, setting up a proper assault. Sarah checked her ammunition. 4 magazines left. Against how many enemies? 20? 30? The numbers didn't matter. Numbers never mattered when you were already committed. She shifted position, moving 20 meters along the rock formation. Found new cover, new angles. Through the thermal scope, she located the sniper team again. If she was going to die here, she'd at least accomplish something first. Sarah steadied her breathing. Acquired the target. Fired. The sniper's thermal signature collapsed. Immediately, incoming fire intensified, but Sarah had already moved, rolling to new cover. She fired again, hitting the spotter. The hostile forces reacted with professional fury. They bracketed her position with suppressing fire while other elements began maneuvering to flank. Sarah's radio crackled. They're moving squads toward you from the east and west. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they close the trap. Copy, Sarah responded, continuing to fire. She dropped another hostile, then another. But for each one that fell, 2 more seemed to take their position. A grenade arced toward her position. Sarah barely registered it before it detonated, the blast wave slamming her against the rocks. Her ears rang. Blood ran from somewhere she couldn't tell where. She tried to stand. Her left leg wouldn't support her weight properly. The hostiles were closing in. She could hear them now, calling to each other, coordinating their assault. Sarah raised the rifle, ready for the final push. Then the outpost erupted with gunfire. Through her ringing ears, Sarah heard the distinctive report of multiple weapons firing in coordinated sequence. The hostiles advancing on her position suddenly had to divide their attention, caught between her and the outpost's renewed assault. Hammond's voice. We're repositioning like you suggested. Eastern wall, concentrated fire. Give them hell, Mitchell. Sarah smiled despite everything. She'd told them not to help. They'd ignored her. Typical infantry never followed orders they disagreed with. She resumed firing, now in coordination with the outposts covering fire. The hostiles found themselves in a crossfire, their neat tactical advance dissolving into confusion. But Sarah's ammunition was critical. 3 magazines, then 2. She made every shot count, prioritizing targets methodically. The hostile assault wavered, then broke. They pulled back to regroup, leaving several bodies in the snow. Sarah used the respite to assess her condition. Her left leg was functional but painful, possibly a fracture from the grenade blast. Blood ran from a laceration above her eye. Her hands shook from cold and adrenaline. She was alive. That was more than she'd expected 5 minutes ago. Mitchell, can you move? Hammond asked over the radio. Sarah tested her leg. Slowly. The hostiles are reorganizing. They'll try again soon. Can you make it back? Sarah looked at the distance. 300 meters of exposed terrain. In her current condition, it might as well have been 3,000. But staying here meant dying when they came back in force. I'm moving, she said. Be ready to provide cover. Sarah stood, gritting her teeth against the pain. She took 1 step, then another. The snow was deep, making each movement exhausting. Behind her, she heard voices. The hostiles were indeed reorganizing, preparing for another push. She had to move faster. The retreat back to the outpost became a running battle. Sarah moved as quickly as her injured leg allowed, using whatever cover the terrain provided. Behind her, the hostiles pursued with renewed determination. They'd seen her effectiveness. They knew she was wounded. They wanted her eliminated before she could reach the relative safety of the structure. Rounds kicked up snow around Sarah's feet. She dropped behind a small rise, turned and fired back. Dropped 1 hostile, missed another, kept moving. 50 meters to go. A round grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She went down hard, lost her grip on the rifle. It landed 3 meters away, half buried in snow. Sarah crawled toward it, each movement sending jolts of pain through her leg and shoulder. Her fingers closed around the barrel just as a hostile appeared on the rise above her. He raised his weapon. A shot rang out not from Sarah's position. The hostile dropped. Keep moving, Reed's voice carried across the snow. He was positioned at the outpost's northern window, providing covering fire. Sarah grabbed her rifle and forced herself upright. 30 meters now. Her vision blurred from blood loss and exhaustion. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. 20 meters. More gunfire erupted from the outpost. Hammond and the others laying down everything they had to keep the hostiles back. 10 meters. Hands grabbed Sarah, pulling her through the gap in the wall. She collapsed inside, gasping. Reed immediately began checking her wounds, while Torres covered the entrance. "You're insane," Reed said, but there was something like respect in his voice. "Noted," Sarah managed. Hammond crouched beside her. "Report. Eliminated the sniper team, the mortar commander, their communications operator, and at least 6 others. But they've regrouped. They're coming hard now. How long do we have?" Sarah checked her watch. 051 hours. First light would come in less than an hour. They'll hit us before dawn. Everything they've got. They know we're weak. Morrison appeared with the medical kit. "Let me see those wounds." While Morrison worked on her injuries, Sarah assessed their situation. Looking at the faces around her, Torres with his shoulder wrapped, Morrison holding his side, Kowalski fighting to stay awake despite obvious exhaustion, Reed's hands trembling slightly from cold and adrenaline. They'd fought well, better than well, but they were at the breaking point. "Ammunition status," Hammond said quietly. Reed's face was grim. "Approximately 100 rounds total, maybe 1 magazine per person. Equipment? Generators down to fumes, radios still jammed, medical supplies nearly depleted. Personnel? Everyone's wounded to some degree. Mitchell's the worst off." Reed glanced at Sarah. "No offense. None taken. I feel terrible." Despite everything, Kowalski laughed. A short, half-hysterical sound that broke the tension momentarily. Hammond stood, moving to study the map one more time. Sarah watched him, recognizing the weight of command. He was responsible for 8 lives now, 7 functional fighters, and 1 badly wounded logistics officer who'd turned out to be more than advertised. "We need a fallback plan," Hammond said finally. "Like what?" Torres asked. "There's nowhere to fall back to." "We could surrender," Kowalski suggested quietly. No one else spoke, but Sarah saw several operators considering it. "They won't accept surrender," Sarah said. "Not after losing that many people. This stopped being a tactical operation when they took casualties. Now it's personal." "How do you know that?" Sarah met his gaze. "Because that's what I'd be thinking if I were them." The temperature inside the structure had dropped to match the exterior. Without the generator, there was no heat. Sarah could see frost forming on the inside of the walls. "We're down to one option," Reed said slowly. "We hole up, conserve every round, and make them pay for every meter. Maybe we last long enough for rescue." "And if rescue doesn't come?" Kowalski asked. No one answered. Sarah pushed herself into a sitting position, ignoring Morrison's protest. Her leg throbbed, her shoulder burned, but her mind was clear. She'd been in situations like this before, different locations, different enemies, but the fundamental equation was always the same. Overwhelming odds, dwindling resources. The question of how you chose to face the end. "Give me that rifle," she said, pointing to the weapon Reed had given her earlier. "You can barely stand." "I don't need to stand. I need to shoot." Hammond looked at her appraisingly. "You have a plan?" "Not a plan. More of a final statement." "Elaborate." Sarah gestured toward the window. "They're going to hit us at first light. They'll use the visibility to coordinate their assault. They'll expect us to be exhausted, low on ammunition, demoralized. We are all those things," Torres pointed out. "Yes, but they don't know how low we actually are. They're still treating us like a full-strength special operations team. They're being methodical, careful, professional." "Your point?" "My point is that I can make them think we're stronger than we are. If I can eliminate their leadership fast enough, create enough chaos in their opening assault, they might pull back long enough for rescue to reach us." Morrison shook his head. "That's not a plan. That's a desperate hope." "You have a better desperate hope?" Silence. Hammond crouched beside Sarah. "I need to know something, and I need the truth. Who trained you? Because you're not just some analyst who went through basic training." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled off her left glove. On the inside of her wrist was a small tattoo coordinates, meaningless to most people. But Hammond's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "You were assigned to—" "I was a lot of things," Sarah interrupted. "But that was a different life. I got out, took a desk job, promised myself I was done with this. Why didn't you say something? Why let everyone think?" "Because I wanted them to think that. Because being underestimated has advantages. Because I didn't want to be that person anymore." Sarah looked at her bloody hands. "But it doesn't matter what I want. It matters what's needed right now." Reed handed her the rifle without a word. Hammond passed over the thermal scope. Torres brought the remaining 7.62 ammunition, barely 3 magazines. "Position me at the western window," Sarah said. "I'll need covering fire for the first 30 seconds, then everyone conserves ammunition. Only shoot if you have a clear target." "And you?" Hammond asked. "I'm going to remind them why they should have brought more people." The operators moved into position. Sarah settled herself against the western wall, rifle braced on the window frame. Her leg was immobilized, her shoulder bandaged, but her hands were steady. Through the thermal scope, she watched the hostile forces staging their assault. They were confident now. They'd seen the defenders' weakness. They knew victory was close. Sarah tracked individual heat signatures, identifying patterns. They're an individual standing slightly apart, gesturing. Commander. They're a cluster around communications equipment. Control element. Their heavy weapon being positioned for direct fire support. She memorized distances, calculated windage, adjusted for the scope's characteristics. The sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Dawn was 15 minutes away. "They're moving," Morrison reported quietly. Sarah saw it too. The hostile forces beginning their final approach. Confident, organized, professional. She settled her breathing, ignored the pain, focused everything on the rifle, the scope, the targets, remembered the weight of every decision that had led to this moment, and waited for first light. The attack came with the dawn. 37 hostiles. Sarah counted them through the thermal scope as they advanced in coordinated waves. They moved with confidence born from a night of wearing down their opposition. This was meant to be the finishing blow. Sarah identified the command element immediately. 3 figures positioned on elevated ground, directing the assault through hand signals and radio communication. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The lead commander dropped. Before the others could react, Sarah worked the bolt, acquired the second target, fired. He went down, clutching his chest. The third commander tried to move to cover. Sarah led him slightly, accounting for movement and wind. Fired. He stumbled and fell. 3 shots, 3 kills, 9 seconds. The hostile advance faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. Without immediate direction, individual elements hesitated, unsure whether to continue or hold position. Sarah didn't give them time to decide. She shifted targets to the heavy weapon position. The gunner was trying to bring his weapon to bear on her position. Sarah fired first. The gunner slumped. She acquired the loader, fired again. "Holy hell," Kowalski breathed. "Cover her!" Hammond shouted. The operators opened fire, suppressing hostile positions trying to respond. But Sarah was already moving to her next target, the communications element. She dropped 2 operators in quick succession, then destroyed the equipment itself with 2 precisely placed rounds. The hostile force was now blind, leaderless, and taking casualties from an opponent they'd thought was nearly defeated. They did what any rational force would do. They retreated to regroup. But Sarah didn't let them retreat cleanly. She tracked individuals as they pulled back, firing whenever someone presented themselves. Each shot forced them to keep their heads down, disrupted their coordination, added to the psychological pressure. By the time they'd withdrawn to relative safety, Sarah had expended 1 magazine and part of a second, 24 rounds. She'd dropped or suppressed at least 15 hostiles. The sudden silence felt surreal. Reed moved to the window, looking out at the carnage. Bodies lay scattered in the snow. The hostiles had left their dead behind in their rush to withdraw. "They're going to need time to reorganize," Sarah said quietly. Her shoulder burned. She'd aggravated the wound with each shot's recoil. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Hammond was staring at her with an expression that mixed awe with something else. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "How many did you?" Torres started, then stopped. "Never mind. I counted." Morrison checked Sarah's shoulder. The bandage had soaked through with blood. "You're bleeding again. You need to stay still. When this is over." "That's not how injuries work." "I'm aware." Outside, the hostiles were indeed regrouping. Through the scope, Sarah could see them forming new command structures, redistributing ammunition, treating their wounded. They were professionals. They'd adjust their tactics. "They'll try something different next time," she predicted. "Maybe indirect fire, maybe a feint followed by a flanking assault. They won't make the same mistake twice." "Can you stop them again?" Kowalski asked. There was no doubt in his voice now, just honest curiosity. Sarah checked her remaining ammunition. 1 full magazine, plus half of another, maybe 30 rounds total. "I can hurt them," she said. "Whether that's enough depends on how badly they want this position." Hammond sat down heavily against the opposite wall. I need to update my after-action report. Logistics officer eliminated multiple hostile combatants, disrupted coordinated assault, saved entire team. That's going to raise some questions. Write that I followed protocol and stayed with communications equipment, Sarah suggested. Everything else was circumstantial necessity. That's a lie. It's also easier than the truth. Reed laughed quietly. The truth being that you're the most dangerous person in this building despite being nearly unconscious from blood loss. Sarah didn't respond. She was tracking movement through the scope. The hostiles were forming up again, faster than she'd expected. They were angry now. They'd lost too many people. Pride demanded resolution. They're coming again, she announced. 5 minutes, maybe less. How can you tell? Body language, formation patterns. They're not taking time to plan properly. They're going to hit us hard and fast, overwhelm through aggression rather than tactics. Hammond stood, checking his own weapon. Everyone, prepare for close quarters engagement. They get through the walls. We make them regret it. The operators moved into final defensive positions. Sarah remained at her window, rifle ready. This time would be different. This time they'd be prepared for her. The assault began with a barrage of grenades. 3 landed inside the structure, forcing everyone to take cover. The explosions were deafening, filling the air with dust and debris. Before the echoes faded, hostiles were rushing the building. Sarah fired into the advancing mass, dropped one, then another, but there were too many, moving too fast. She worked the bolt as quickly as possible, each shot counting. Reed and Torres engaged from the eastern window, Hammond and Morrison from the southern positions. Kowalski covered the northern approach where the wall had cracked. The firefight was intense and chaotic. Sarah's world narrowed to sight picture, trigger press, bolt manipulation, muscle memory from years ago taking over completely. A hostile reached the western window. Sarah dropped the rifle and drew her sidearm, firing 3 rounds at point-blank range. The hostile fell back. Another appeared. Sarah fired twice more. Click. Empty magazine. The hostile raised his weapon. Reed's shot caught him from the side. He collapsed. "Reload!" Reed shouted at Sarah. She did, fumbling with the magazine. Her hands were slippery with blood. She couldn't tell if it was hers or someone else's. The assault wavered. The hostiles had underestimated the defensive fire. They pulled back again, leaving more bodies. Sarah counted her remaining ammunition. 9 rounds in the pistol, maybe 10 rounds in the rifle. "Status," Hammond called out. "Still here," Torres responded. "Down to last magazine." "Same," Reed said. "Ammunition critical," Kowalski added. "Maybe 30 rounds total." Morrison was applying pressure to a new wound on Reed's arm. Reed took a round. "Through and through. He'll live. But we need to stop the bleeding." Sarah scanned the hostile positions. They were reforming again, but she could see the hesitation now. They'd taken heavy casualties. Their leadership was gone. Their equipment was compromised. They were reconsidering whether this position was worth the price. "They might withdraw," Sarah said quietly. "Or they might call in reinforcements," Hammond countered. "Or that." The sun had fully risen now, burning away the morning mist. Sarah could see the battlefield clearly, a brutal tableau of snow, stained red, abandoned equipment, the aftermath of close-quarter combat. They'd held. Somehow, impossibly, they'd held. But they couldn't hold forever. Sarah's radio crackled. Through the static, a voice. "Iper, actual. This is Rescue 6. How copy?" Hammond lunged for the radio. "Rescue 6, this is Viper actual. We are under heavy assault. Need immediate extraction." "Copy. Viper actual. We have your position. ETA 12 minutes. Can you hold?" Hammond looked around at his exhausted, wounded team. At Sarah, still braced at her window despite barely being able to sit upright. At the dwindling ammunition. At the hostile forces preparing for another assault. "Affirmative," he said. "We can hold. 12 minutes. It might as well have been 12 hours. The hostiles heard the radio transmission. They had to know rescue was coming, which meant they had 12 minutes to overrun the position or withdraw empty-handed. Sarah watched them through the scope. Their body language changed, becoming urgent, aggressive. They were going to risk everything on one final push. "They're committing everything," she announced. "This is it." Hammond distributed the last ammunition. 3 rounds per person, enough for maybe 1 more magazine of covering fire, if they were lucky. "Listen up," Hammond said, his voice carrying command authority despite exhaustion. "We've held this long. We hold 12 more minutes, no matter what. Clear?" A chorus of acknowledgements. Sarah checked her rifle one last time. 10 rounds. She had to make each one count. The final assault came like a hammer. The hostiles advanced without concern for cover, without tactical finesse, just overwhelming aggression, betting they could absorb losses long enough to breach the structure. Sarah fired methodically. Target, acquire, fire, work the bolt, repeat. Each shot dropped a hostile, but more kept coming. The operators fired their remaining ammunition, creating a wall of lead that slowed but didn't stop the advance. Then Sarah's rifle clicked empty. She transitioned to her sidearm, firing at closer targets. The hostiles were 20 meters away now. 15, 10. Torres threw his last grenade. The explosion tore through the advancing line, but they kept coming. 5 meters. Sarah could see their faces now. Young men, mostly, scared but committed, following orders even as those around them fell. A hostile appeared at her window. Sarah fired twice. He dropped. Another took his place. Sarah's pistol clicked empty. She grabbed the rifle, using it as a club. The hostile tried to bring his weapon to bear. Sarah struck him across the face with the rifle butt. He fell back. Then Reed was there, providing covering fire. Hammond and Morrison holding the eastern approach. Torres and Kowalski fighting at the cracked wall. The sound of helicopters grew louder. The hostiles heard it too. Some hesitated, others kept pressing. Then the helicopters crested the ridge, gunships with rocket pods and chain guns. They opened fire, tearing into the hostile positions. The assault broke immediately. Hostiles fled in every direction, abandoning equipment and wounded in their panic. The helicopters circled, providing suppression, while transport birds landed near the structure. Viper Actual, this is Rescue 6. Coming in hot. Prepare for immediate extraction. Hammond grabbed Sarah's arm, helping her toward the door. Can you walk? Does it matter? Fair point. They stumbled out into the snow. Combat medics rushed forward, triaging the wounded. Sarah was pushed onto a stretcher despite her protests. I can walk, she insisted. You really can't, the medic replied, strapping her down. As they loaded her into the helicopter, Sarah caught glimpses of the battlefield, the scattered bodies, the damaged outpost, the exhausted operators being helped towards safety. They'd survived. Impossibly, incredibly, they'd survived. The helicopter lifted off. Through the open door, Sarah watched the outpost shrink below them. She'd arrived there as an afterthought, a logistics officer no one expected anything from. She was leaving as something else entirely. Reed sat across from her, his arm bandaged. He caught her eye and nodded once, a simple gesture of respect between professionals. The others were similarly quiet, processing what they'd been through. Hammond sat beside Sarah's stretcher. Command is going to want a full debrief. I know. They're going to have questions. A lot of questions. I know that too. You saved our lives. Sarah looked at him. We saved each other's lives. That's what teams do. Except you're not really on our team, are you? You're something else. I'm exactly what my orders say I am. A logistics officer on temporary assignment. Hammond smiled slightly. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Then you should probably work on your accent, Your Majesty. Despite everything, Hammond laughed. The other operators joined in, releasing tension through humor. The flight back to base took 40 minutes. Medical personnel were waiting when they landed, immediately transporting the wounded to the field hospital. Sarah's injuries were assessed. Fractured tibia, deep laceration above left eye, gunshot wound through right shoulder, multiple contusions, severe hypothermia, and blood loss. The doctor who examined her shook his head. You shouldn't have been able to function with these injuries, he said, let alone engage in combat. I've been told I'm stubborn. That's an understatement. They kept her for observation, pumping her full of antibiotics and pain medication. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, too exhausted to fight the drugs. When she woke, a colonel was sitting beside her bed. Officer Mitchell, he said. We need to talk. Sarah struggled to sit up. The colonel waved her back down. Rest. This is informal. He pulled out a tablet. I've been reading the after-action reports. They're interesting. Captain Hammond's report describes you as instrumental in the team's survival. Sergeant Reed's report calls you the single most effective operator in the engagement. Lieutenant Morrison says you saved his life specifically. Specialist Torres says you were the only reason any of them made it out. They're being generous. Are they? The colonel studied her. I pulled your full jacket. The actual one, not the sanitized version. You've had quite a career, Officer Mitchell. Multiple deployments under different command structures. Specialized training across 3 continents. And then 3 years ago, You requested transfer to logistics and analysis. I wanted a change. People with your skill set don't usually want changes. They usually burn out or die in the field. He leaned forward. Which was it? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I got tired of killing people, even when they deserved it. And yet when it was necessary, I did what was needed, because that's what I was trained to do. The colonel nodded slowly. The team wants you decorated. Distinguished Service Cross, minimum. They're writing it up now. I'd prefer they didn't. Why not? Because I don't want the attention. I don't want people digging into who I used to be. I just want to do my job and be left alone. The colonel considered this. That's going to be difficult now. What you did out there that doesn't stay quiet. Word spreads. Then make it stop spreading. Edit the reports. Minimize my role. Attribute success to the team as a whole. That would be dishonest. It would be politically convenient. They stared at each other. Finally, the colonel sighed. I can probably manage a compromise. We'll file the reports with appropriate classification. Your name stays out of any public recognition. But internally, people are going to know. I can live with that. Good. The colonel stood. Rest. You've earned it. When you're healed, we'll discuss your next assignment. Sir, I'd like to stay in logistics if possible. We'll see. Sometimes what we want and what we're needed for don't align. He left. Sarah lay back, staring at the ceiling. She'd tried to escape her past, tried to become someone different, but the past had a way of catching up, dragging you back into the person you'd been. Maybe there was no escaping it. Maybe she'd always be what she was trained to be. Sarah spent 4 days in the field hospital before they cleared her for transport back to main base. Her leg was in a cast, her shoulder immobilized, but she could function. Barely. The team came to visit before she left. Hammond arrived first, carrying a bag. Thought you might want these. He pulled out her personal effects, the tablet with logistics manifests, her backup radio, the gloves she'd worn. Thanks. We're shipping back tomorrow. Command wants us debriefed at Fort Bragg. Hammond sat down. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what? For underestimating you. For treating you like you didn't belong. For... Stop. Sarah cut him off. You didn't know. I didn't want you to know. That was the point. Still. You saved our lives while we were busy thinking you were just support staff. I was support staff. You needed supporting. I supported. Sarah managed a slight smile. Unconventionally, maybe. But still. Reed appeared in the doorway. Mind if we come in? The rest of Viper Squad filed in Torres, Morrison, Kowalski, and 3 others Sarah had barely interacted with during the siege. We wanted to say thank you, Torres said simply. All of us. You didn't have to do what you did. Yes, I did. We were on the same team. Not according to the org chart, Kowalski pointed out. According to the official assignment, you were just observing. Observation includes active participation when circumstances require. Morrison laughed. Is that what we're calling it? Active participation? Sounds better than desperate last stand. They talked for a while, sharing stories, processing the experience. Sarah learned details she hadn't known during the chaos, how Torres had held the eastern wall alone for 10 minutes when everyone else was engaged elsewhere, how Kowalski had used his last grenade to seal a breach in the northern wall, how Reed had stayed conscious despite blood loss to coordinate defensive fire. They were good soldiers, better than good. They'd done everything right. But Sarah knew the truth without the chaos she'd created in the hostile forces' command structure. Courage and skill wouldn't have been enough. Sometimes victory came down to who made the other side blink first. After they left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. The pain medication made everything fuzzy, but she could still see it clearly. The thermal images through the scope, the faces of the hostiles as they advanced, the moment when she'd thought they were all going to die. She'd left that life behind for good reasons. The weight of it, the moral complexity, the way it changed you, made you into someone comfortable with violence as a tool. But it was still there, under the surface. Muscle memory and tactical instinct and the ability to make hard choices under pressure. Maybe you couldn't really leave it behind. Maybe you just learned to live with it. A knock at the door. A lieutenant she didn't recognize entered. Officer Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Chen, Intelligence Division. I have some questions about the hostile force you engaged. What kind of questions? We're trying to identify them. They were well-equipped, well-trained. Not typical insurgents. Sarah had noticed that too. Professional military, possibly former special operations themselves. That's our assessment as well. but we can't determine which country or organization they were affiliated with. Your observations could help." Sarah described what she'd seen: equipment, tactics, coordination patterns. Chen took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. "One more thing," Chen said. "You eliminated at least 3 command-level personnel in the opening phase of the final engagement. We found their bodies. They were carrying interesting identification." "Interesting how?" "Contradictory. Multiple passports, conflicting service records. We think they might have been contractors." "Mercenaries?" "Possibly. Which raises the question of who hired them and why they were targeting your team." Sarah hadn't considered that angle. She'd been too focused on surviving to think about motivation. "Captain Hammond's team was on an intelligence-gathering mission," Chen continued. "Surveillance only, not high value enough to warrant a professional military response, unless they saw something they weren't supposed to see, or unless someone wanted to make sure they didn't report what they found." "Exactly." Chen closed his tablet. "We're investigating. But if you remember anything else, equipment markings, overheard communications, anything, contact me immediately." After Chen left, Sarah lay back, mind racing despite exhaustion. A surveillance mission turning into a siege by professional contractors. That suggested something bigger than random terrorism or local conflict. Someone had wanted Hammond's team eliminated. The question was who and why. Sarah's radio buzzed. Hammond's voice. "Mitchell, you there?" "I'm here." "Chen just left here too. You thinking what I'm thinking? That this wasn't random?" "Yeah." "Command is taking it seriously. They're launching a formal investigation." Hammond paused. "They want me to testify. Probably want you too. I'm not going to be much help. I was too busy shooting to take notes. You killed their leadership. You saw them up close. That makes you a primary witness." Sarah considered this. A formal investigation meant scrutiny, interviews, her background examined in detail, exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. "I'll cooperate," she said finally, "but I want my participation kept classified. I'll pass that up the chain." They signed off. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to rest. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying the siege, analyzing decisions, questioning alternatives. Could she have done something different? Saved more lives? Ended it faster? The questions were pointless, but unavoidable. Every operator she'd ever known carried them. The weight of decisions made under pressure, judged with the clarity of hindsight. 3 days later, Sarah was transported back to Fort Bragg. The medical staff wanted to keep her longer, but she'd refused. She could recover just as well at home as in a hospital bed. They gave her crutches, pain medication, strict instructions about physical therapy. She thanked them politely and ignored most of the instructions. Her apartment felt strange after the field. Too warm, too quiet, too safe. Sarah tried to settle into routine. She filed reports, attended mandatory medical appointments, avoided conversation with colleagues who looked at her with new curiosity. Word had spread despite the colonel's efforts. Not the details, but enough. The logistics officer who'd somehow been involved in a major combat engagement. The woman who'd helped a special operations team survive against overwhelming odds. People treated her differently now. With respect, yes, but also with distance. Like she was something foreign, something that didn't quite fit in the normal order. Sarah had expected that. It was why she'd wanted anonymity. 2 weeks after returning, she received orders to report to a conference room in the operations building. The message was brief and official. No context, no explanation. Sarah arrived on time, crutches and all. Inside the conference room were 5 people. The colonel who'd visited her in the field hospital, Lieutenant Chen, Captain Hammond, and 2 civilians in suits. "Officer Mitchell." "Thank you for coming," the colonel said. "Please, sit." Sarah lowered herself into a chair, propping the crutches against the table. One of the civilians opened a laptop. "Officer Mitchell, I'm Agent Thornton, FBI Counterterrorism Division. This is Agent Park. We're investigating the attack on Captain Hammond's team. I've provided my statements. We know. We've also been investigating the deceased hostiles. We've identified them." Thornton pulled up photographs. All former military from various Eastern European countries, all employed by the same private security contractor, Redstone Tactical Solutions. Never heard of them. Most people haven't. They're very discreet. They provide security, training, sometimes direct action for clients who want plausible deniability. Agent Park leaned forward. "Here's what we know. Redstone was contracted to eliminate a specific intelligence asset in your operational area. Captain Hammond's team was gathering signals intelligence that would have compromised that asset. Hammond's expression darkened. They tried to kill us to protect a spy? More than a spy, a high-level intelligence network. The people running it have significant resources and no qualms about eliminating threats. Who are they? Sarah asked. That's classified above your current clearance. Thornton looked uncomfortable. But here's why we're having this conversation. Redstone failed. Their team was eliminated. That's embarrassing for them professionally. It makes them look weak. So they might try to finish the job. Target the people who defeated them to restore their reputation. The implications hung in the air. Hammond spoke first. You're saying we're in danger? We're saying you should take precautions. We've increased security around your team. But Officer Mitchell presents a unique problem. Why unique? Sarah asked, though she already knew. Because you eliminated most of their casualties personally. You're the primary reason they failed. If they're going to retaliate against anyone, it's you. Sarah absorbed this information. She'd survived the siege only to acquire a different kind of target on her back. What are you recommending? She asked. We can provide protection. Safe house, rotating security detail, until we've neutralized the threat. For how long? Months, possibly longer. Sarah shook her head. No. Officer Mitchell, I'm not going into protective custody. I have work to do. Your work isn't worth dying for. Neither is hiding in a safe house, waiting for someone else to solve my problems. The colonel interjected. Mitchell, be reasonable. These are professional killers. I'm aware. I've met them. Thornton and Park exchanged glances. Finally, Thornton spoke carefully. We've read your full jacket, Officer Mitchell. We know what you're capable of. But this isn't a battlefield. This is asymmetric threat. Assassination, ambush, indirect attack. They'll have the initiative. Then I'll have to take it away from them. That's not how protection details work. I'm not asking for a protection detail. Hammond leaned forward. Mitchell, what are you suggesting? Sarah met his eyes. If they're coming after me, let's make it count. Use me as bait. Draw them out. Eliminate the threat instead of hiding from it. Absolutely not, the colonel said immediately. I'm not authorizing. You don't have to authorize anything. I'm volunteering. Agent Park spoke for the first time. Even if we agreed to this operationally, which is doubtful, it would require extensive planning, resources, a whole task force. Or it requires one person who's harder to kill than they expect. The room fell silent. Sarah could see them processing, calculating, weighing options. Finally, Thornton spoke. We'll consider it, but you're not making any moves on your own. That's an order. Understood. The meeting broke up. As Sarah headed for the door, Hammond caught her arm. You can't be serious about this, he said quietly. Why not? Because you just spent 4 days in a hospital after nearly dying. Because you're injured. Because this is insane. Sarah looked at him steadily. They're coming either way. I'd rather meet them on my terms than wait for them to pick the time and place. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. The moment I pulled that trigger, it became my fight. Hammond studied her face, then sighed. You're not going to listen to anyone, are you? Not really my strong suit. I noticed. He paused. If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone. The team will back you up. That's not necessary. It's not a debate. You saved our lives. We're returning the favor. Sarah wanted to argue, but she recognized the expression on Hammond's face. The same stubborn determination she'd seen during the siege. Fine, she said. But we do this smart, controlled, no cowboy nonsense. Says the woman who just volunteered to be bait for international mercenaries. That's different. That's tactical. Despite everything, Hammond smiled. Sure it is. The plan took 3 weeks to develop. Sarah spent that time recovering, training, and coordinating with the joint FBI military task force that had formed around the threat. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Establish Sarah in a predictable routine, create opportunities for an attack, and have overwhelming response ready to neutralize the attackers. In reality, it was far more complex. Safe houses had to be secured, surveillance teams positioned, extraction routes planned, backup plans for the backup plans. Sarah trained despite her injuries, rebuilding strength and mobility. The cast came off her leg after 2 weeks. The shoulder took longer, but she pushed through physical therapy with single-minded determination. You're healing remarkably fast, her doctor observed. Most patients with your injuries would still be limited. I'm motivated. There's motivated, and then there's whatever you're doing. Be careful you don't re-injure yourself. Sarah nodded but didn't slow down. She didn't have time for caution. Hammond and his team trained alongside her. They'd all volunteered to serve as close protection, rotating shifts to maintain coverage. Sarah had argued against it initially, but Hammond had been right, she couldn't do this alone. The FBI agents Thornton and Park provided intelligence updates. Redstone Tactical Solutions had gone quiet after their failure, but that didn't mean they'd given up. It meant they were planning. "We've identified several potential contractors who might take this job," Thornton explained during a briefing. "All high-level, all expensive, all with success rates above 90%. Anyone specific?" 3 names keep coming up. He displayed photographs: Ivan Kozlov, former Spetsnaz; Marie Duchamp, French Special Forces; and Chen Wei, former Chinese military intelligence. Sarah studied the faces. All professional, all dangerous, all exactly the kind of people who would make this complicated. Do we know which one Redstone hired? No, possibly all 3. That was concerning. 1 professional assassin was manageable. 3 operating in coordination would be exponentially harder. When? Sarah asked. Unknown. Could be days, could be months. They'll wait for the right opportunity. Sarah nodded. Patience was part of the game. The hunter who waited longest often won. They established her routine carefully. Morning runs with surveillance teams shadowing at a distance. Work at the base during regular hours in offices with controlled access and multiple exits. Evening meals at a handful of rotation restaurants, each scouted and secured ahead of time. It looked natural, predictable, and beneath the surface, it was a carefully constructed trap. Days passed, then weeks. Sarah maintained her routine, always aware that each moment could be when they struck. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the heightened awareness, the way she positioned herself with clear sight lines, the subtle tension that never quite faded. "You okay?" her supervisor asked one afternoon. "You seem different, just restless. Doctor says I need to take it easy, but I'm not good at taking it easy." I've noticed. The waiting was exhausting in its own way, constant vigilance without visible threat, like holding your breath underwater, never quite sure when you could surface. Hammond checked in regularly. "Anything?" "Nothing. It's frustrating. Maybe they decided it wasn't worth it. Or maybe they're better at waiting than we are." On a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the initial warning, Sarah's instincts finally triggered. She was leaving the base, heading toward her car in the parking structure. Something felt wrong. Not obviously, not dramatically, just a subtle shift in the environment. A car parked in an unusual spot. A maintenance worker who didn't quite move like maintenance. Sarah kept walking, not changing her pace. She activated the subtle panic button sewn into her jacket. 2 blocks away, Hammond received the signal. "This is Viper 1. Possible contact. All units. Alert status." Sarah reached her car. Checked underneath clear. Checked the interior clear. Started the engine, no explosion. She pulled out of the parking structure, following her usual route. In her mirrors, she tracked 3 vehicles. 2 were FBI surveillance. The third was unknown. "Unknown vehicle, gray sedan, 4 cars back," she said into her concealed microphone. "Copy," Thornton's voice replied. "We see it. Running the plates now." Sarah turned onto the highway. The gray sedan followed. So did the FBI vehicles, maintaining careful distance. "Plates are stolen," Thornton reported. "Taken from a similar vehicle 3 days ago. This is it." Sarah's heart rate increased, but her hands stayed steady. After weeks of waiting, the game had finally begun. "Rules of engagement?" she asked. "Let them commit to the attack. We want them contained before we move." Sarah continued driving, heading toward a predetermined location, an industrial area with multiple fallback positions and clear fields of fire. Every variable had been calculated. The gray sedan accelerated, moving up through traffic. "They're closing," Hammond reported. He was in one of the FBI vehicles, armed and ready. Sarah checked her own weapon, a compact pistol in a specially modified holster. She'd fought to be armed during this operation. Thornton had reluctantly agreed. The sedan pulled alongside her. Tinted windows prevented her from seeing inside. Then the rear window lowered, and a pistol emerged. Sarah yanked the wheel hard right, dropping behind them as gunfire erupted. Rounds punched through where her window had been moments before. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" Thornton called out. The FBI vehicles closed in. The gray sedan accelerated hard, trying to escape. But Sarah kept pace, her defensive driving training taking over. Another car appeared, a black SUV, coming from a side street. It rammed the FBI vehicle on the left, sending it spinning. "Multiple hostiles," Hammond reported. "This is coordinated." Sarah processed the situation rapidly. Not one assassin, a whole team. They'd anticipated the trap and brought overwhelming force. The black SUV angled toward her, trying to force her off the road. Sarah accelerated past it, then cut hard left across traffic. Horns blared as civilian cars swerved. In her mirror, she saw the SUV pursuing. The gray sedan had blocked the FBI vehicles, creating a barrier. She was isolated. Sarah activated her microphone. "I'm cut off. Multiple hostiles in pursuit. Proceeding to location Delta." "Negative," Thornton's voice. "Too dangerous. Will." Sarah switched off the radio. She didn't have time for tactical debates. Location Delta was a warehouse complex, currently abandoned pending demolition. It offered cover, escape routes, and most importantly, it leveled the playing field. She pulled into the complex, tires screeching, abandoned her car and ran toward the nearest building, ignoring the pain in her recently healed leg. Behind her, both hostile vehicles entered the complex. Sarah reached the warehouse, ducked inside. It was exactly as the reconnaissance photos had shown: open floor plan, multiple levels, plenty of cover. She moved quickly to a predetermined position on the second floor, drew her weapon, controlled her breathing. The hunters had just become the hunted. 4 hostiles entered the warehouse. Sarah watched them from her elevated position, counting, assessing. They moved with professional coordination, clearing corners, communicating with hand signals. These were not amateurs. These were Redstone's best. Sarah waited, patient. Let them commit. Let them move deeper into the structure. When they were properly positioned, she fired. The first hostile dropped. The others immediately took cover, returning fire toward her position. But Sarah had already moved, relocating to a different vantage point. She fired again. Missed. The hostile had good instincts. He rolled behind cover just in time. The other 2 were flanking, trying to pin her position. Standard tactics. Effective, if predictable. Sarah descended to ground level, moving through the warehouse. She was in her element now: close quarters, limited visibility, tactical problem solving. A hostile appeared around a corner. Sarah fired twice, center mass. He fell. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. They'd split up, trying to overwhelm her through crossfire. Sarah kept moving. Never stay static. Never let them establish firing solutions. She heard sirens in the distance. The FBI response was coming, but they were still minutes away. Minutes she had to survive. A hostile moved into a beam of light from a broken skylight. Sarah aimed carefully, fired. He dropped. 2 down, 2 remaining. But these 2 were smarter. They weren't exposing themselves. They were moving in coordinated bounds, covering each other, forcing Sarah to retreat deeper into the warehouse, into a corner, into a trap. Sarah realized the problem too late. They were herding her toward a dead end. No exits, no cover, just a concrete wall and open floor. She stopped, reassessed. Couldn't go forward. Going back meant running into them. Up was the only option. Sarah holstered her weapon and climbed a rusted ladder to the 3rd floor. Her shoulder screamed protest, but she ignored it. The hostiles followed. She could hear them on the ladder below. Sarah reached the 3rd floor, mostly collapsed ceiling, exposed beams, dangerous footing. She moved carefully across the unstable surface. Behind her, the first hostile reached the floor. He spotted her immediately, raised his weapon. Sarah fired first. The hostile stumbled backward, crashed through a weak section of floor, and fell to the 2nd level with a sickening crunch. 1 left. The final hostile was cautious now. He'd seen 3 teammates die. He knew Sarah was dangerous. He called out in accented English, "You're wounded, exhausted. Eventually you'll make a mistake." Sarah didn't respond. Talking was for people who needed to negotiate. She repositioned, finding cover behind a structural column. Checked her ammunition. 4 rounds left. The hostile was moving, trying to flank, but the unstable floor limited his options. Each step was carefully tested. Sarah waited. Patience was its own weapon. The sirens were louder now. The FBI was close. The hostile knew it too. He was running out of time. He'd either complete the mission now or abort. He chose to commit. He rushed Sarah's position, firing rapidly, trying to suppress while closing distance. Bold, aggressive, exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. She stepped from cover, aimed carefully despite the incoming rounds, and fired. The hostile's leg gave out. He fell, cursing, trying to bring his weapon up. Sarah approached, kicked his weapon away. He looked up at her with something like respect. "You're the one," he said. "From the mountain." "Yeah. They said you were just support." "They were wrong." Footsteps pounded into the warehouse. FBI, don't move. Agents swarmed the building. Sarah raised her hands, letting them clear the scene. Thornton appeared, looking simultaneously relieved and furious. What the hell were you thinking, shutting off your radio? I was thinking I didn't want to die while debating tactics. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. Hammond arrived, saw the bodies, saw Sarah standing calm despite everything. 4 against 1? They made it easier by splitting up. Of course they did. Hammond shook his head. You're insane. Effective, but insane. Medical personnel checked Sarah over. Minor injuries, cuts, bruises, aggravated her healing wounds. Nothing serious. The survivor is talking, Agent Park reported, confirming it was a Redstone contract. They were hired to eliminate you specifically. Did they say by who? That's above his clearance. But we're investigating. The survivor was loaded into an ambulance under guard. The bodies were documented, photographed, removed. Sarah sat on the warehouse's exterior steps, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind bone-deep tiredness. Hammond sat beside her. So that's it? It's over? Maybe. Or maybe Redstone sends another team. You can't keep doing this. Eventually the odds catch up. I know. So what's the plan? Sarah considered. I need to find out who's actually behind this. Cut the head off the snake instead of fighting the teeth. That's not your job. It became my job when they tried to kill me. Twice. Hammond was quiet for a moment. Then, the team wants to help. Whatever comes next. This isn't your fight. You keep saying that. We keep disagreeing. Sarah looked at him. Saw the determination there. The loyalty. The professional respect that had grown from their shared experience. Okay, she said finally, but we do it smart. Gather intelligence, build a case, no rushing in. Agreed. Thornton approached. Officer Mitchell, we need your statement. Full debrief. This is going to take hours. Sarah stood, grimacing as her battered body protested. Let's get it done. The debrief lasted until dawn. Every shot fired, every decision made. Every tactical consideration explained and re-explained. When they finally released her, Sarah went home to her apartment, showered, changed clothes, tried to sleep but couldn't. Her phone buzzed. A message from the colonel. My office. 0900. Don't be late. Sarah checked the clock. She had 30 minutes. The colonel's office was occupied by multiple people when Sarah arrived. The colonel himself, sitting behind his desk, Thornton and Park flanking one side. And a man Sarah didn't recognize. 50s. Expensive suit. The bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Officer Mitchell, this is Director Warren from Homeland Security, the colonel introduced. Warren stood, extending a hand. Officer Mitchell, I've heard quite a bit about you. Please, sit. Warren waited until everyone was seated. I'll be direct. We've traced the contract on your life back to a shell corporation with ties to foreign intelligence services. The people who wanted you dead have significant resources and reach. How significant? Significant enough that eliminating you was worth risking exposure. Your actions in the field disrupted a major intelligence operation. You didn't just save a special operations team, you compromised a network that's been in place for years. Sarah absorbed this information. So what happens now? Now we leverage this. We use what you know, what you've done, to roll up the entire network. But it requires your cooperation. I've cooperated fully. I mean a different kind of cooperation. Warren leaned forward. We want to bring you into a specialized unit. Joint task force combining military intelligence, FBI counterterrorism, and homeland security assets. Your role would be operational direct action against high-value targets that conventional forces can't reach. Sarah was silent. This was what she'd left behind. The black operations, the moral ambiguity, the life that wore you down. I'm a logistics officer, she said finally. You're far more than that, and we both know it. Warren opened a folder. Your real service record, the operations we've confirmed. 15 confirmed hostile kills before the siege. 27 during the siege. 4 more yesterday. You're one of the most effective operators we've ever seen. I left that behind. Did you? Or did you just try to pretend you could? The words hit hard because they were true. Sarah had tried to become someone else. But when tested, her training had emerged immediately. Instinctively. I need to think about it, Sarah said. You have time. But not unlimited time. These threats don't wait. The meeting ended. Sarah left, head spinning with implications. Hammond was waiting outside. What did they want? Recruitment. For what? Something permanent. Something that would mean admitting I'm not really a logistics officer. Hammond studied her. What are you going to do? I don't know. They walked together across the base. Soldiers going about their routines. Normal military life happening all around them. Can I tell you something? Hammond asked. That siege. When I thought we were going to die, I made peace with it. I'd had a good career, served honorably. But then you saved us, and I realized I had more to do. More I wanted to accomplish. Your point? My point is that you have a gift. A terrible gift, maybe, but a gift nonetheless. You can do things most people can't, and the world needs people who can do those things. Even if doing them changes you, makes you into something harder, something separate from normal life, maybe especially then, because someone has to be willing to carry that weight. Sarah considered this as they walked. 3 days later, she made her decision. She met Warren at an off-base location, a nondescript office building that could have housed anything. I'll do it, she said, with conditions. Name them. I maintain my cover as logistics. Publicly, that's still my role. Any operations I'm involved in stay classified. And I get final say on missions. If I think something's wrong, I can refuse. Warren considered. The last one is problematic. Operational chain of command is necessary, but so is operational discretion. You want me because I make good decisions under pressure. Let me make them. Finally, Warren nodded. Agreed. Welcome to the task force, Officer Mitchell. They shook hands. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settle onto her shoulders. She was back. Fully, formally, officially. No more pretending to be something she wasn't. The weeks that followed were intensive training. Sarah learned the task force's protocols, met the other operators, studied target packages. Hammond and his team transferred into related roles, providing support and direct action capability. They'd chosen to follow Sarah into this new phase. You're stuck with us, Reed explained. We've decided you're bad luck if we're not around to watch your back. Sarah smiled. That's the worst reason for career decisions I've ever heard, but accurate. The first mission came 6 weeks after Sarah joined. A mid-level operative in Redstone's network, based in a neutral country, vulnerable to extraction. Sarah led the operation. 5 operators, including Hammond and Reed. Infiltration, snatch, exfiltration, textbook special operations. It went perfectly. The target never knew what happened until he was zip-tied in an extraction vehicle. The intelligence he provided led to 3 more operations, then 5, then a dozen. The network began to collapse. Assets disappeared. Safe houses were raided. Financial channels were frozen. 6 months after the warehouse firefight, the main intelligence asset, the one Redstone had been protecting, was captured during a carefully coordinated international operation. It made headlines for about 12 hours before being classified and buried. Sarah's name appeared nowhere in the reports. She remained, officially, a logistics officer on routine assignment. But within certain circles, word spread. A new operator, exceptional skills, impossible to rattle. The woman who'd held off an army, then dismantled an intelligence network. They started calling her the Aide, with audible quotation marks. Sardonic, respectful. Sarah tolerated it, barely. One evening, after a successful mission, the team gathered at an off-base location for informal debrief. Someone, Kowalski, probably ordered drinks. Hammond raised his glass. To logistics coordination. Everyone laughed. Seriously, though, Hammond continued, to the best damn logistics officer in the military, even if that's complete fiction. I handle logistics, Sarah protested. Tactical logistics. Resource allocation in dynamic environments. Is that what we're calling it? It's accurate. Reed raised his glass. To Sarah Mitchell, who taught us that titles don't matter, capability does. They drank. Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Purpose. The sense that she was where she needed to be, doing what she needed to do. Later, walking back to base, Hammond asked, Any regrets? About what? Coming back to this life. You tried to leave it behind. Sarah considered. I regret that it's necessary. I regret that the world needs people like us. But I don't regret being here. That's the best answer you're going to get, isn't it? Probably. They walked in comfortable silence. Above them, stars were visible despite the light pollution. The same stars that had been overhead during the siege, during the warehouse fight, during every operation since. Sarah had tried to escape her nature, tried to become someone different. But in the end, you couldn't change what you were fundamentally built to be. You could only choose how to use it. She'd made her choice. And despite everything, the danger, the The moral weight, the isolation, it felt right. They said she was just an aide, just support, just someone who didn't belong in the field, until the moment when everything depended on her being exactly what she was. And then titles didn't matter, labels didn't matter, only results, only survival, only doing what needed to be done, regardless of who you were supposed to be. Sarah Mitchell, logistics officer. Sarah Mitchell, operator. Sarah Mitchell, the aide who saved a special operations team and dismantled an intelligence network. Sarah Mitchell, who'd finally stopped running from herself.